This is an unabridged reading of Beyond the War of Thorns, Chapter 1, Part 4. Later that night, back in the war-torn forest of Ashenvale, Valdira duskily held a severely injured Kaldrai by the neck. Rather than kill it outright, the Dark Ranger seemed to enjoy playing with her victim. Like a cat plays with a mouse it will inevitably kill and devour. Such pathetic creatures, she mocked. You are undeserving of these forests. Soon, this will all belong to our Dark Lady, and your kind will be no more.
Duskily,
interrupted Dagon Dreadblade as he approached, while holding his chest in an attempt to ease the pain of a severe injury. The rogue's clothing was largely charred, and cuts and burns could be seen throughout his undead body in the exposed areas. Valdira took a moment to examine the Deathstalker's appearance while still clutching her Night Elf victim. "Are the traitors dead, Dagon?" she asked.
"No, not all of them,"
responded the rogue with a tone of irritation in his voice.
"They received help from a powerful shaman, but next time they will not be so lucky. I will gather the remaining Deathstalkers, and we will find the—"
"No," interrupted Valdira. "That will have to wait. The war is escalating, and the war chief needs us here." Dagon grunted as he turned his head and peered into the distance, clearly displeased by her response. He was not one to accept defeat so graciously. His prey still lived, and his daggers hungered. "Be patient, Dagon," Valdira added. "There is no shortage of blood for you to spill here in Ashenvale," she said as she turned back to the Kaldrai in her grips. The Night Elf was struggling to breathe and was clearly paralyzed, but the look of fear on its face was palpable. Valdira's eyes glowed red as her hand squeezed tighter around the Kaldrai's neck, which also prompted Dagon's yellow eyes to glow brighter. "Feast, Dreadblade," finished the Dark Ranger as the Night Elf's life left its body. Dagon Dreadblade approached the corpse and began to devour it voraciously. The Forsaken's wounds began to heal and close with each limb it consumed, until he was satisfied. Dagon then stood up with renewed vigor and wiped the blood from his maws. Over the following days, many more would fall prey to the assassin's bloody appetite. The following morning, somewhere on the grassy plains of the Barrens, the Horde rebels each dealt with the previous night's events in their own way. "I'm glad you two liked my breakfast," said Hina Wolf Cloudweaver with glee in her voice. "I'm just worried that your two companions haven't eaten at all. Kondo has been standing over your troll friend's grave all morning, and Shin has been training by himself since the sun rose. They need food in them to properly heal from last night's fight."
"They'll be crunch."
"Fine, Hina," said Lao as he continued to stuff food into his mouth.
"Don't worry about Kondo.
We all have to deal with loss at some point in our life,
and Shin just feels humiliated from his defeat. This is just how he deals with it."
"Well, I hope they feel better soon," said Hina while clasping her hands together tightly.
"This is the best glurp, curiously tasty omelet crunch I've ever had," added Lao as he buried his face into another bowl of food.
"I imagine Shin is also dealing with the side effects of being so close to death," said Aladrir Sunwing as he gently stroked Lorius's back. "I know even I am still struggling with last night's experience. I suppose it will take some time to process and move on from such trauma," added the hunter as he ran his hand over the area where he had been mortally wounded. Odd, thought Aladrir. Although the damage had been completely repaired by a shock Cloudweaver's power, he now felt a strange mark he had previously not noticed. It was a series of small carvings crossing over each other, no larger than his thumb. "Hopefully my grandfather can help all of you," continued Hina as she looked over at the Solom Kondo. "He has a strong connection with the spirits, and he always seems to have the necessary words to mend broken hearts. He helped me so much when my parents died, when I believed my whole world had ended." Kondo Shatterpath's brown fur shined in that Baron's morning sun, but his countenance was anything but bright. His armor was stained with the blood of his brother-in-arms as well as his own, and his gaze was one of bitter determination. The warrior stood over Tenox's grave while tightly gripping his two weapons as the elder shaman, a shocked Cloudweaver, walked over.
"You asked me a question last night,"
said Achak as he slowly approached, his large hoofs creating a faint tremor every time they stepped down on the plains floor.
"You asked me why I came to your aid. The answer is, I dreamed of this. I had seen Sylvanas' betrayal for many nights before the Horde even set foot in Ashenvale, and I saw other things,"
continued the old shaman,
"such as Tenox's courageous sacrifice, a willful sacrifice on his behalf, to give the Horde a champion that it need to survive. You see, young warrior, we all have roles to play in the cycle of life and death. Do not be troubled by the past, and instead embrace what you have today. Thanks to your valiant troll friend. I understand, Elder, but, responded Kondo, after contemplating the shaman's words for a moment, I knew Tenox for only a day, and in that day I came to know that he was a troll of honor, and because I foolishly pleaded with those who have no honor, he is now dead. I wonder, what good are the ways of the Shuhalo if they only serve to benefit the dishonorable, while bringing destruction on the honorable? That is a good question, young one, said Achak while looking to the skies, as if the answer laid there. Our people know more than others that violence only leads to more violence. We hear the Earth Mother cry out for peace, and it pains us when blood must be spilt, even when it's the blood of our enemies. But you are right, the way to peace is not clear when our enemies would simply kill us without remorse if we extended our hand in friendship. Kondo continued to listen and contemplate the Spirit Walker's words. I do not have an answer for you, continued Achak while looking down at Tenox's grave. I don't know if our ways have any value in this world of cruelty and violence. Long ago, I had a decision to make, and I chose the path of violence. I fought not because it was the right choice, or the choice that would bring peace to this world. I chose to fight because I knew of no other way. I believe you made the same choice last night. As Achak spoke, the rest of the group walked over to listen to the conversation. I hope that one day the Shuhalo find a better way, continued the shaman. But take heart, young war brave. Until that day, we must fight for honor, and we must fight for our survival. Thank you, Elder, said Kondo, lifting his head up with renewed purpose. It is settled then. I now understand that simply waving the red banner does not make you Horde. Those without honor have no place amongst us. I will not be fooled again, he continued. From this day forth, I pledge to fight against those who would sully our Horde. I will not rest until they all lay crushed beneath my totem. And I will be there to fight by your side, friend, pledged Lao while lifting his staff to the skies with one hand. Count me in, added Shin. I have a score to settle with those rogues. And my grandfather and I will join you too, cheered Hina while placing one hand on Achak's shoulder and jumping and throwing her other hand up in the air. The old shaman simply chuckled. The group then all turned toward Aladrir in anticipation. Friends, I stammered the Sindore. I wish you all the best. I hope that one day I see you all again, and in victory, but I plan to head back to Kalthalas as soon as possible. With this war now starting, I want to be there to protect my family. I doubt any of them would go along with Sylvanas' bloody campaign, which is why it's imperative that I be by their side, now more than ever. I understand, Aladrir, firmly stated Kondo, and should you ever wish to come back, know that you will always have a place among us. Go in peace. Thank you, Kondo, responded Aladrir. Thank you all. And with a courteous bow, the hunter and his pet lynx headed off to the eastern kingdoms. Kondo and the rest of the rebels, however, prepared for the war they would soon be waging on the Banshee Queen's forces. Sylvanas' horde continued their push north into Caldari lands over the following days as the War of Thorns approached its fiery conclusion. The final battles were being fought in the forests of Darkshore, around the night elf town called Auberdine, while a small raft floated inconspicuously under the night sky far from shore. Equally distant from Darkshore and from the world tree called Teldrassil,
Home to countless Kalderae and many others, the raft carried a peculiar figure. The individual laid flat on the raft, while under a full-body tarp used as protection against the elements as well as concealment thanks to its design and texture.
What a strange pile of kelp,
commented an orc atop a captured Night Elf vessel as it had slowly sailed by earlier in the evening. This figure now peered far into the distance at the besieged Night Elf town using a rather large brass telescope.
What now, Sylvanas?
Thought Iron Ghost as he saw the Kalderae people desperately defend Aberdyne from the never-ending onslaught of Horde forces. The orc's raft had a small, rickety propeller that helped him maneuver away from the various ships in the area, and it was now allowing the rogue to get closer to the World Tree.
Will you actually try to occupy Teldrassil?
He thought.
Do you think the Night Elves will just roll over and allow you to...
His thoughts were interrupted as molten boulders of fire began to rain on the World Tree. Within seconds, the towering, living island's base was fully engulfed.
What?
Shouted Iron Ghost in panicked disbelief. Even at this range, he could feel the heat rising, and if he couldn't gain distance soon, he'd likely be boiled alive. The orc rotated the raft as quickly as possible and turned the propeller's power to maximum capacity.
This heat is unbearable,
he said as the water around him began to boil.
These are not normal flames.
After a few seconds, Iron Ghost's tiny propeller had a small explosion, and then emitted several sparks and a small cloud of smoke, as it finally gave out under the heat and stress. The orc, though, had reached safety, as the waters around the raft were now within acceptable temperature ranges. The overheated rogue desperately threw the tarp off of his body in order to allow the cool breeze to flow over him.
What have you done, Sylvanas?
He said as he lay there, staring into the smoke-covered night sky, streaked with the red and orange hues from the colossal fire.
You'll doom us all if you're not stopped. You have to be stopped.
Simultaneously, on the other side of Azeroth, in the snowy mountains of Dun Morogh, within the dwarven fortress city named Ironforge, a lone dwarf sat, staring blankly at his beer mug. Under his dark black hair and stoic face, not all was well for this patron of the Stonefire Tavern. His name was Yolaf Stonecore, and since his youth, all he had known was war and violence. With the Burning Legion's defeat, the world had known peace for the last few months, but Yolaf had only known inner turmoil. It was difficult for a warrior like him to find his place in times of peace. He had stood guard over the dwarven lands of Dun Morogh in these times, sitting alone like an outcast, jumping at any opportunity to defend his people. Putting down an occasional unruly trog or ice troll, though, could never sate his thirst for combat, and strong ale never worked either. 1,000! Shouted an older, dark, gray-haired dwarf with jubilee in his voice at a nearby table behind Yolaf. 1,000 demons! That's how many sons of guns me own lad killed! I'd wager me boots not even his crusty old uncle off that many. The old dwarf would lift his rifle up with one hand in celebration every time he shouted, and he had his other arm around a much younger, red-haired dwarf who was clearly embarrassed by this behavior.
Tell him, laddie,
ordered the older dwarf of his son.
1,000,
said the younger dwarf meekly in a hushed tone.
About 1,000.
He added in an even more hushed tone. The younger dwarf had a massive hunting spear in his hand, which he would use to balance himself every time his father nearly toppled him with his explosive celebratory outbursts.
Well, that's a fine bit of work, that is,
chuckled the dwarf sitting in front of them at the other end of the table. This other dwarf had a brown, braided beard, and his eyes weren't visible under his hood. The designs and patterns of his clothing indicated that he was a priest, a very high-ranking priest.
Funny,
thought Yolaf. The warrior wasn't too proud about eavesdropping on someone else's conversation, but the momentary humorous distraction gave him welcome relief from his thoughts.
And how many did you slay, Bruni?
Asked the priest with a sly smile.
If your lad got 1,000, you musta...
The dwarf was suddenly stricken by an overwhelming wave of raw psychic energy. The priest himself unleashed an uncontrolled, powerful psychic scream within the tavern and the surrounding homes.
So many!
Shouted the priest as raw psychic energy beamed out of his eyes and mouth.
So many died!
He added as he fell to the ground, the psychic energy released by so many dying Kalderae ravaging his mind.
Sulas, who's dying?
Shouted Bruni as he simultaneously attempted to cover his ears and help his priest friend, who was now writhing on the floor. Suddenly, the psychic scream ended as Sulas once again gained control, and all those within the tavern sighed with relief. A small crowd gathered around the priest, who was still lying on the floor, with a look of terror plastered on his face.
"Speak with me, you lad," said Bruni. "What's happening to you?"
"The Calderae, stammered Zulus. "They're all dead! So many died in the fire! The horde is destroyed, incinerated Teldrassil!" A few yards away, Yolof listened intently, and quickly realized what had happened. He did not celebrate. How could he? Such a tragedy did not bring him joy. War had returned to Azeroth, and the warrior was genuinely saddened by this. But something inside him did come alive. He felt relief. He stood up and reached over to his massive double-edged greatsword, which leaned against the wall. He brought the weapon, the hulking slab of metal, to his back and fastened it to his armor. After placing a few silver coins on the table, the warrior exited the inn. It was almost evening, but the sun still shone brightly over the Kel'Thuzad landscape. The peaceful ambience of the tranquil forest and the vibrant yellow and red leaves hanging from the trees stood in sharp contrast to the darkness sweeping over the rest of Azeroth. "It's good to be home, Lorius," said Aladrir Sunwing as he took in the beauty and splendor of his homelands. With the fiery destruction of the World Tree, Teldrassil, at the hands of Sylvanas Windrunner and the Horde, Azeroth had become that much more dangerous, especially for a lone Cinderay traveling by boat from Kalimdor and crossing the Eastern Kingdoms on the back of his Hawkstrider. He had managed to pass near Alliance forces headed to Lordaeron unnoticed, and he had stayed clear of any Horde encampments, just in case any Sylvanas loyalists were on the hunt for deserters. The Blood Elf was overjoyed to be seeing his kin soon, especially after the terrifying night he had endured at the hands of assassins in the Barrens. He had tasted death, and was only brought back thanks to a Chaac Cloudweaver, a powerful Tauren shaman that had saved him and his companions. As Aladrir walked through the Eversong woods, reflecting on the last few days, he caught a glimpse of a dark, terrifying figure. For a split second, this putrid image had stained the picturesque beauty of the lands around him, and then had quickly disappeared. Aladrir immediately knew what this figure was, or rather who this dark figure was. The Blood Elf had scarce recollection of that fateful night at the crossroads, but one individual had haunted his dreams since that night. In the hunter's mind, this monster had established itself into the embodiment of terror itself, Dagon Dreadblade. "No," said Aladrir, with a hint of fear in his voice. Quickly, the Blood Elf removed a device from his belt and opened it to reveal a trap lined with a series of sharp serrated blades. He placed the trap behind him and began to scan the surrounding areas. "Stay alert," ordered the hunter of his pet lynx, Lorius, to which the large cat obeyed and lowered its posture to a hunting stance. Briefly, the Blood Elf saw what he believed was a humanoid figure in the shadows next to a large tree and some bushes. In an instant, he grabbed a flare from one of his pouches and fired it over the shaded area. "Damn," he said. "Nothing." The flare had only revealed some dead branches covered in moss. "Lorius, if— Ah!" Aladrir was suddenly jabbed through his left eye by Dagon's dagger. The hunter's cat-like reflexes allowed him to avoid lethal damage, but his eye was completely perforated. The elf was stunned for a moment, as blood began pouring from his eye socket. Before Dagon could strike again though, Lorius lunged at the rogue, narrowly missing the Forsaken, who quickly rolled away. Aladrir was still dazed and the blood on his face obscured his vision, but he knocked an arrow nonetheless and fired at Dagon. The projectile narrowly missed.
"Come here, kitty,"
the rogue taunted the lynx. Lorius lunged once again, and this time Dagon waited until the last moment to dive out of the way, which allowed the cat to strike the rogue on the arm. Dagon's wound was a satisfactory exchange for the Forsaken though, as he had lured the lynx into landing on Aladrir's trap, clamping onto the feline's front paw.
"Lorius!"
shouted the hunter as he prepared to fire another arrow. Dagon began sprinting for the tree line, and right before the hunter fired his arrow, the rogue ducked and rolled, dodging the attack. Before Aladrir could prepare another shot, the Forsaken had disappeared behind the foliage. The Cinderay paused for a moment, searching his thoughts for something that could aid him. The hunter then looked at Lorius, who was writhing in pain, and he put his bow down and rushed to his companion's side. Using all his strength, Aladrir managed to open the trap and pry the lynx's paw from its grips. "Go, Lorius!" ordered the hunter. The cat understood his master, but clearly did not want to abandon him. "I said go!" shouted Aladrir, his voice now much more agitated. "Go to Kalan! Ugh!" Lorius obeyed the hunter's orders and began to run north just as Dagon struck again, driving both of his daggers into the elf's back.
I don't think so, wretch,
said the rogue as he turned from the hunter and began sprinting towards Lorius. The lynx would normally easily outpace the Forsaken, but with its heavily injured paw, the rogue was quickly closing in. Let my aim be true this one last time, said Aladrir under his breath as he knocked another arrow and drew his bow. Taking a deep breath and releasing it slowly, the hunter mustered all of his strength to focus on the target.
Got you now, Ka!
Dagon was struck through his right leg by Aladrir's arrow, causing him to stumble to the floor. The rogue looked up in time to see Lorius disappear over the following hill.
Damn him,
cursed the Forsaken as he got up with a slight limp and sprinted towards the tree line once more, knowing another arrow was sure to follow. Dagon managed to evade Aladrir's next shot. The rogue then gripped the arrow still inserted in his leg and broke it in half, and proceeded to pull the two halves off of the projectile out of his body. He threw the broken arrow on the floor as he disappeared behind the shrubbery, avoiding yet another arrow from the hunter as it struck a tree. Although severely injured, Aladrir stood his ground and maintained a watchful eye towards the trees that surrounded him. He set out another trap, one that would hopefully ensnare the rogue and allow the hunter to escape, and he maintained his arrow nocked, ready to strike when necessary. Several minutes passed, however, and Dagon did not attack. I have to keep moving, thought Aladrir as he noticed the sun was close to setting. The hunter knew that his chances of surviving would drop drastically once night arrived, and he slowly and painstakingly continued his walk north. Stay calm, the Blood Elf said to himself as he walked into the tree line, quickly glancing up at every branch and always looking over his shoulder. Aladrir walked for several yards. Then suddenly, he spotted a small strand of cloak behind a tree some distance from his left flank. The strand disappeared behind the tree almost immediately, and most would have never noticed it. Aladrir's trained eye, however, had seen it as clearly as a sunwell. The hunter prepared himself as he began to maneuver silently towards an angle at which he could land a good shot, and suddenly he saw a piece of the cloak again, lightly flailing with the evening breeze. I've got you now, monster, he thought as he kept moving, ensuring that his steps made no sound. Finally, he saw the dark figure leaning against a tree. From where he was standing, he had the perfect shot. His arrow would enter through Dagon's ribcage and rip through the rogue's heart. The specialized armor-piercing arrow Aladrir would use guaranteed it. The hunter drew his bow and once again slowly exhaled, letting fly the deadly projectile. His aim was true, and the arrow penetrated the brown cloak at the exact point the Cinderay was aiming for. What? Said Aladrir as he heard the sound of his arrow striking wood, and then he saw a medium-sized log fall to the ground with the rogue's cloak wrapped around it.
I told your friends,
exclaimed Dagon as he jumped down on the hunter from above and stabbed both of his daggers through the victim's neck.
You were marked for death. Your fate was sealed,
finished the rogue as he swung his arms outward and completely decapitated Aladrir. Dagon Dreadblade took a moment to admire his kill. He then stood up straight and took one last look at the hills and forest leading north. His eyes glowed with a haunting yellow hue, and in an instant he turned around and headed back towards Lordaeron. As the sun fully set over Quel'Thalas, the rogue became one with the darkness, and any trace of him disappeared.